Welcome to the Sustainable Travel Podcast. This is a podcast that interviews a range of different travelers from different backgrounds to see what sustainable travel means to them. And today I am here with Angie from Where is Angie, who's been making content online for over 10 years, has built an audience of over 80,000 combined social media followers, and has been living in Spain for 10 years as well. And today we're going to be talking all about influencer behavior online and how it can play into sustainable and responsible travel. So super cool topic. Hi, Angie.
Hi, so happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you. I know we've talked about this topic so much already, but I feel like it's going to be good to kind of air it online.
Yes, I agree. I think a lot of people can benefit from the conversations that we've had in private about these topics.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's such a big thing, right? Like when we're talking about kind of influencers, content creators, they're people that we see every single day, like all of us in our lives. And they're really like influential. It's in the name, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the problem is that people sometimes forget the responsibility that comes with having any kind of social media presence. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have a lot of followers, but the moment that you have an account that is in some way public and your content is in some way accessible by other people, I think people forget that there's a certain responsibility to sharing and the kind of content that we put out online.
Yeah, yeah, that's so true. Um, so tell us, like, you've been online for a long time now. How did you get into that?
So I kind of fell into it accidentally because I moved abroad a little over 10 years ago now. And when I moved abroad, one of the things that I wanted to do was to have kind of like a diary of sorts where my friends and family back home could follow along and see what I was getting up to, since it was difficult for me to, because of the time difference, to necessarily be able to call them and have like these long conversations with every single person. So what I would do instead is I thought it would be a good idea to have this, Instagram where I would be posting pictures and photos kind of like where I was, what I was doing with, I've always kind of liked longer captions. So it really was like a diary of sorts. And it was a good way for me this way to kind of be able to inform my family, my friends, like where I was, what I was doing, what I was seeing, and kind of bring them along on the journey with me. So when I say I fell into it accidentally, that's kind of what happened because I started posting and people started following me. Initially, I didn't really pay attention to it, to be perfectly honest with you, up until I think I went home to Canada back in like 2016-ish. And one of my friends was like, "Oh, what are you going to do? You have like 10,000 followers on social media. Like, you should be doing something with that." And I was like, actually, you're right. I do have, a certain following. It didn't really click until then because I was really thankful to say that since the beginning, I've had a really wonderful community. And honestly, it just kind of felt like I had a bunch of online friends that were excited about my journey. And I didn't really think of it much other than my online community. And I think that's when I kind of realized, like, oh yeah, I am a creator and I am making content that's, being accessible to the public and has some kind of implications. And that's when I started kind of joining more of these like travel creator groups and making more like creator friends, not just other people that were, somewhat online, but actually like specifically creators and kind of trying to understand the mentality and how people were kind of working their blogs or accounts or social media space because it was all really, really new back then. So it's kind of like the wild, wild west. We were all trying to kind of figure it out. And then eventually that's when I decided like, oh, okay, I can start creating content, maybe working with brands or working with hotels. And that's when my first kind of like travel experiences as a creator started. It was around 2017. And that's when I like kind of fully understood, the role that we have as a creator. And I think it's been a process of trial and error, like throughout the years of kind of like seeing responsibility. But I will say that since the very early days, like 2016, 2017, which is when I feel like I really got started, I've had conversations with lots of people in the space about responsible creation, being a good influence as an influencer, or because back then we were mostly using the term influencer to refer to ourselves, but we were already having these conversations about like sustainability and how not to affect locals when you're traveling and, trespassing onto private property. Like we were already starting to call each other out within our community. And I feel like those conversations at some point between the transition between photos and reels got a little bit lost. And I feel like now we are starting to talk about these things again. Although perhaps not in the same way as we were talking about them 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah, and those kind of early stages were so formative, sorry, like it was so much going on and like
Yes.
how we do things now.
Yeah, and everybody was trying to figure it out, right? Like that was kind of in the beginning, we were all trying to figure things out. And I would argue there's some things that I don't think necessarily needed to be figured out, like the fact that you should never trespass onto private property should be, something people automatically know and don't need to necessarily figure out. But I think people were still kind of like trying to understand what it means to post and then have an impact with what you post and how far reaching that impact can actually be. I think that is something that we were all kind of like talking about and learning on the fly. And I think we still all are continuing to learn nowadays.
Yeah, I don't think anybody realizes like how much of an influence they have online. Like I think whether you've got 50,000 followers or 50 followers, you can have an influence, like you said at the beginning.
Yes.
And I think nobody is actually aware of how much theirs is.
Yeah. And I would actually argue that it's a bigger problem now than it was 10 years ago, because 10 years ago, it really did matter how many followers you have. Like we all had an influence, but if you had, I don't know, 100,000 followers back in the early days of Instagram versus somebody that had 2,000, you obviously had a much bigger impact because back then, the way that your content was pushed out based on the algorithm really had to do a lot with your following and how many, engaged followers you had in your community and your base. And because it was reaching mostly your followers, and those were then the posts that would, hit the explore page and go viral and whatnot, those people with those big platforms really had the biggest impact. But nowadays, I would argue like even small creators, even somebody with 50 followers that has a public platform and posts one TikTok reel or one TikTok or one Instagram reel that goes viral, that already has the impact that somebody could have the impact that somebody that has, over 1 million followers could have because that could go viral. Like I think nowadays it's so much easier for smaller creators to go viral. Therefore, all of us have the potential to have a really big impact. And it's something we all have to keep in mind when we're putting content out there because any of us could go viral at any time. And therefore you want to be really conscious of like what you're putting out there because that content can have the possibility to hit huge amounts of people. And even if it doesn't hit those huge amounts of people, even if it hits, 5 people and those 5 people do those negative actions, you're already having some kind of impact on world and it's not necessarily a positive one.
Yeah, I think that's really true to bear in mind as well. Like, we don't all need to go completely viral to
Yeah.
have this impact. Definitely not.
Mm-hmm.
Mm,
And I think people use virality kind of like almost as an excuse to say, well,
agreed.
this piece of content didn't go viral, so it's okay. Like, even
Yeah,
if I did something questionable, only 10,000 people saw it, so it's not a big deal. But 10,000 or 5,000 or even 200 or even 5 people is still a lot of people. And if those people then, copy your actions or do things that you kind of put out into the sphere of having done yourself and other people then copycat or mimic those actions, then that can have a really big impact or just an impact in however you define it that has, consequences on people, on the world, on the nature, on the environment, and on many other, domains.
agreed. I think when you hear people, which we both have, saying like, "Oh, nobody, quote unquote, sees my content," and then you look at their reels and say they've got like 200 views for every single reel. I understand it feels like not much when you compare it to bigger influencers, but if you look at like if you got 200 people into a room every single day looking and listening to you and being like, what do you have to say? That's heaps. That's so many people.
Yes.
And as you
I
say,
actually, yeah,
like,
I actually really don't like it when people say things like, oh, so if, like my content isn't being seen by anybody because it kind of almost like
rude.
uh, speaks poorly of the people that are seeing your content. Like it's like you're almost saying those 200 people that saw that piece of content don't matter because they weren't 5,000 people or 10,000 or whatever your metric of success is, right? And I think
Yeah.
we forget about that. And I think when we say things like that, we're actually almost like being harmful towards our fans, our followers, the people that, enjoy our content and show up for it. Like I think
Yeah.
we need to sometimes remember that. Like, even if your content just resonates with one person, do it for that one person and stop worrying about the however many more,
That's what I was going to say. It's like it's kind of rude because the people who are seeing your content are its best audience. So if you
Yeah.
get five people who saw your content and you think, oh, well, that's nobody, those are probably the five people that are thinking about going to the place that you've
Mm,
just talked about in your video. So
exactly.
they are the most impactful people in that way. But so let's talk about what we mean because we kind of launched straight into talking about like influence and what people can do. But I think you've said as well, like in your home in Barcelona, currently, and also just online, we've both seen these examples of like what we would probably call maybe negative behavior rather than bad behavior, or behavior that has an impact. So, can you give us maybe some examples or tell us what we're talking about here when we're talking about like this
Yeah.
difficult influencer behavior?
So I'll try to give some examples. I think of Barcelona, there's a lot of very easy examples to pick from. Hopefully, with these things kind of being vocalized out loud, it'll make more sense to the listeners as to what we're talking about. So I think one really good example, because it's not perhaps super harmful, but it is a negative influencer behavior, is I'm sure many of you have seen there's like a trend going on right now in Barcelona. There's like a really famous escalator. Well, I mean, it wasn't famous until the trend, but there's an escalator that essentially you walk out of the metro, you take this escalator up, you turn around, and right behind you is the Sagrada Familia, which is one of Barcelona, if not Barcelona's most well-known tourist attraction. And so a lot of people started, what they started doing is they started filming themselves by putting their cell phone on the escalator. So they put the cell phone on the escalator and then they'd film themselves like as the escalator is going up, they'd film themselves, turning around and looking at it and being like, wow, look at this. And this usually went along with the audio, like that was like, are you in pain? No, I'm in Spain. So this kind of trend started quite a few months ago, and it became extremely disruptive to local life very quickly. And how was it disruptive? Well, first of all, people's cell phones started getting stuck in the mechanical staircase, which meant they would break the mechanical staircase. Keeping in mind that these staircases, these escalators are normally the main use is, you would think, for people that need to use them, right? Like healthy young people, we can walk up the stairs, but people with mobility issues, with heavy suitcases, older people, people with disabilities, like these staircases or these escalators are meant to be used by people that need them, essentially. So you can imagine when suddenly, these TikTokers, influencers are breaking these staircases on a regular basis and people are having to walk up the stairs, that obviously is quite disruptive and can actually make several people's life quite difficult, especially because the alternative would have to be to go back into the metro and essentially walk back down, go find the other exit and go out another way, which, can be a little bit of a walk around, like 5 to 7 minutes more of your time. So aside from like breaking the escalator constantly, they were also, the way that they're positioning themselves on the escalator here, the etiquette is that if you're taking an escalator, you want to stay to one side and to let other people walk up on the other side, especially people that are in a hurry, that are going to work, that are in a rush. So there's one side that stands and the other one you can like basically walk up the escalator. So what would happen is you'd have these influencers and the boyfriends and their Insta husbands or whatever filming themselves, essentially blocking the access of the people that were trying to go up quickly. And keep in mind, this is one of the most frequented metro stops in Barcelona. So there's a lot of people going to work. There's a lot of people in a hurry. There's a lot of people in a rush. And suddenly, you're having a girl filming herself. You can't, or a boy filming themselves. You can't walk past them because they're blocking the staircase. That becomes disruptive very quickly, as you can imagine. So actually, they banned it. They put up signs. There's actually a very clearly marked sign saying that this is not allowed, not to film yourself on the staircase. They actually turned off the escalator for quite a while, which was even more, as you can imagine, which a lot of people complained about because that, also ends up being a disruptive solution. Um, and the problem is that despite, the signs, despite there being a security guard at the bottom of the staircase, despite there being, all these notices not to do this, people are still doing the trend. And I think it's one of those little things that you think, well, that's not such a big deal, right? Like how is me filming myself on a staircase, affecting local people's lives? But it does, and maybe if you don't break the staircase, that's good for you, but maybe somebody else will. Not to mention it also becomes a pickpocket hub spot because now all the pickpockets know that there's people filming themselves with their phone on the staircases and people were getting their phones stolen. So I think this is one example of like something that seems relatively innocent that can become very disruptive very quickly. Another really kind of good example of this would be there is a really famous viewpoint in Barcelona that actually it's one of my favorite viewpoints. You have like a wonderful view of the entire city called the Bunkers. They're in like kind of a district that is a little bit further away from the sea. And the issue was that people obviously found out about this spot through social media because it wasn't like a super, super popular spot for people that were not locals. Originally, it was really popular for locals to go there to have like drinks with their friends, watch the sunset together, kind of like celebrate the end of the day. It started to go viral on social media because people were posting pictures from it. People were, seeing the pictures, then going to find the spot. It became a very popular tourist spot. A lot of people, like a lot of foreigners started coming there and they would bring alcohol, they would bring drugs, they would have these like super loud parties, bring live music, like people DJing, like full out parties until like 1 or 2 in the morning, keeping in mind that this is in a residential area.
Yeah.
So you would have people peeing on like the neighbors' doors, vomiting on people's doorsteps, ringing doorbells of like people's houses at like 1 or 2 in the morning, and keeping in mind that in this area there's a lot of older people, a lot of families with young children. So that obviously became extremely problematic. A lot of the locals in that area started to feel very upset, and they actually had like protests, and they actually protested to City Hall about this. And City Hall put out some measures where they now shut access to this area after a certain time, so you can no longer watch the sunset there, essentially. And it's a shame because it was a lovely spot, and it's like one of those situations where you have a few people that kind of ruin it for the rest. And I think a lot of people are upset about the fact that they can no longer go there, but it was just not sustainable. It was so damaging to the people in that area that I can understand why they closed it down. It just pains me that they had to do that. And all of that kind of snowballed because of, social media and people posting about it.
Yeah, I
So I
mean,
think those are two examples that come to mind.
very good examples. I was going to say in the example that you gave for the staircase, let me tell you if that was if that was London, like people would have just been like elbowing you out the way, like it would have been really dangerous because people on the on the
Yes.
tube, like obviously it's the metro in Barcelona in the tube, they will not hesitate to just like shove you out the way if they need to be somewhere because two to
Yeah.
3 minutes can be the difference between you getting to work at 9 and not. Like it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yes, definitely. I think people here, I've been in the London metro and I feel like people there are a lot more aggressive with like, and I understand it 100%. I think people here are maybe not so like prone to shoving, but they will get upset with you because people are in a hurry too. Like, a lot of people work in that area and they need to get to their work on time. And if you're standing and blocking their way and it's your vacation and that's great, but it's not somebody else's vacation, then, it's not a good situation.
in London because we have same as Barcelona, I know, but because we have 2 to 3 minute tubes that connect to like overground trains, the difference between you making a tube and then a tube 2 minutes later can mean that you miss the overground, which can delay you for an hour. Which if
Yeah.
okay, if you're on your way to work, it's bad because you're going to be late. But like if you're on your way home and you've got kids and you want to
Yeah.
like make dinner for them and stuff, like I had colleagues who were like, yeah, I will shove people because otherwise, I don't see my kids.
Yeah.
But I think those two examples are really good. And I know that you also gave me another one, which we won't share the names of because it's kind of relevant.
Yeah.
But there was issues with like buses going to major tourist attractions in Barcelona, right? That were
Mhm.
getting like too crowded for locals to take the buses,
Yeah.
because they're just intercity buses and tourists are using them like they're hop on, hop off kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah, in this case, like I said, we won't say names or bus routes, because that would kind of, go against the point of the measures that were implemented later. But there are like small buses here in Barcelona that are called bus del barri, like neighborhood buses, which are these tiny little, maybe 13 people, 12 people can sit down in those buses. Some of them can sit less. Like, for example, the other day I was in one that had 7 people seating room. So they're quite small. And these are buses are specifically used in parts of Barcelona where the streets are very narrow, very windy, where the big buses will not fit, and where there's a lot of people that, for example, a lot of older people that need to have access to be able to get home because most of these places are hilly or hard to get to. And therefore, you need to provide some kind of transport for them to be able to get back to their residence. However, in this case, what happened was one of these buses was just being completely overrun by tourists because one of the stops was close to a popular tourist attraction. And the problem was that there were other routes that these tourists could take to get to said attraction. However, a lot of them were focusing on getting on these small neighborhood buses, and it was, leaving a lot of people without access to the bus, like situations where you would have elderly, like older adults having to wait in the hot sun for, three buses, so 45 minutes approximately, because every time they would try to get on the bus, you would have a horde of tourists just swarming the bus. And the thing is that tourist behavior in Barcelona is, you can criticize it. There's a lot of very bad tourist behavior in Barcelona. And a lot of these people just would shove right by these like older adults with, canes that were obviously, slower, had a slower mobility to get on the buses. And then you'd have the entire bus packed, and these people that had probably been waiting there for 15-20 minutes now have to wait another 15-20 minutes, and then next bus comes, same things happens, and once again another 15-20 minutes. And so you can understand that people were getting very upset, very exhausted with the situation. There was a lot of like tension on these buses, between like the locals and the people that were there as tourists. A lot of like negativity was coming out. And so they protested to City Hall, and City Hall actually took one of these neighborhood buses off of Google Maps, with the idea being that the local people that know it's there will take it, but otherwise it's not accessible on Google Maps. So people who are looking for a route to get to said attraction won't have that as an option for transport. And honestly, it's been a good solution, and I'm glad that they did it. It's just another example, right, of like
Yeah.
bad tourist behavior and our
Yeah.
impact kind of on like the places that we travel to.
It's, I think, like when we talk about problematic tourist behavior, it's actually quite wild the influence that something so innocuous as like taking the bus or taking a selfie on an escalator can have. But if we bring this kind of back to influencers and content creators, where did they come into this? Like, in your opinion, because I have thoughts on this as well as like what their role is. But why do you think this specifically comes from them? Because the things we've described equally could, apart from the escalator, just be kind of people going and being rude and disrespectful and not thinking about what they're doing. But I do think influencers and content creators play a quite a specific role in this. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, of course, I think that they do play a specific and I would say kind of very key role in these bad behaviors because they essentially distribute these bad behaviors onwards, right? So it's true that you will have people that come here that do, act in poor ways, do bad things, negative tourist behaviors, but then those people will leave and that's that. You'll have that one person who had an impact on X amount of people. They were here, and then that person will leave. The difference is that when you have a content creator that comes into the equation or an influencer, many times these influencers or content creators then share about what they're doing. And this could be, innocent things like, for example, the selfie on the or the, filming themselves on the escalator, or going to the bunkers and taking a beautiful picture, editing all the people out. So it looks like they're the only ones there, but taking that beautiful picture there. Or in the case of the bus, they could be sharing, like, to get to X place, take this bus. Look, it's a tiny little neighborhood bus. Nobody knows about it. Take this bus. So it's the fact that they essentially like disseminate this information into the public eye and into the masses. And then it gets picked up by other people. That's the difference, right? Like, and I think that's very key because if I make, for example, a reel telling you how to get to X attraction, and in that reel, I tell you specifically, hey, you might not know about this, but you can take this little neighborhood bus and it'll take you right to this place. Then, however many people are going to see my reel are then going to go, okay, I can take this bus, or I can go to this place and take this beautiful picture, or I want to also create the same video because that looks so cool, right? Like when we're talking about trends and things. So I think one thing is like disseminating the information, which then can propagate that negative behavior onwards. And the second thing is actually creating content which then other people want to mimic or copycat, because I think that's one of the biggest
Yeah.
problems on social media is we're all essentially mimicking and copycatting each other's content, because you see a picture from someone that inspires you to go to that place and you say, I want that same picture in that same place. And then, when that place becomes overrun by, hundreds of people wanting that exact same picture, well, then you obviously had a very big impact, whether you wanted to or not, because you started the trend, but then somebody copied you, and then somebody copied them, and then three people copied that person, and it just, snowballs onwards into something that becomes out of our control. So
Yeah.
that's what I think is kind of like the main problem.
Yeah, I think so. Firstly, like recapping that, then I think like the reach is like a really big deal. But actually, there was something that you did several times, I think subconsciously when you were talking there that I don't even think you realized because you are a responsible content creator. For example, when you were talking about the buses, you said several times quite emphatically, these are small neighborhood buses. And I think that is really important because that kind of information is often critically missed out. And if, for
Yeah.
example, you're talking about take this bus, it's really small, only 16 people can get on it, only 7 people can sit down,
Yeah.
people will think about that and be like, huh, okay, like, noted sort of thing. They
Yeah.
subconsciously they will pick up on that. And a lot of the time, content creators just don't mention this sort of stuff. It's
Yeah, that's
not
true.
necessarily their fault. They're visitors to that place. They don't know every nuance. But when that information is left out, it's critical information that doesn't help like people's behavior and they will
Mhm.
just, as you say, pile on. They'll think, well, I'll take this bus. Whereas if they knew it's a teeny tiny bus that comes every 15 minutes and goes to residential areas, maybe they wouldn't do
Yeah.
that, you know?
Yeah, actually, I think you're right. And I think I have a tendency to say those things because I'm very conscious of those facts.
Yeah.
But I think that kind of actually ties really well into what I was going to say next is that I really don't like it when people talk about, hidden gems and discovering new places. Because I think a lot of the times it's kind of almost false advertising, because a lot of these
Yeah.
so-called hidden gems are actually not hidden gems at all. Like I see regularly, and I know we've talked about this, I see people posting locations off of the Costa Brava, which is, the famous coast right by Barcelona to the north of Barcelona, which has, beautiful pristine beaches, really cute idyllic little fishing towns. It's obviously a very beautiful location, and I can assure you that most of the places along the Costa Brava are not hidden gems. They are very well known. And I think a lot of the times people forget that just because international tourists may not know about a place doesn't mean it's a hidden gem. It could be extremely popular amongst locals, like many places along the Costa Brava are. So if you are then, sharing this, because I think a lot of us are trying to get away from like the places that we consider to be too touristy, because now it's become almost a thing to try to kind of seek out places that don't have that many tourists. So I think um, when we market these places on social media and we say, oh, you need to go visit this hidden gem of a town on the Costa Brava, that can be harmful because then people are going to go there. But most of the time, those towns are extremely touristy, even if not all of those tourists are international tourists. Many of them are locals coming from Barcelona to, relax on the Costa Brava for their summer vacation. And I think I've seen a lot of that recently. And I think that is also, leaving out key information to how crowded things are. For example, we posted a reel recently. We went to Tosa de Mar.
Yeah.
And I remember there was somebody that commented and said, like, oh, this is, this looks like such a hidden gem. And my response to that was, actually, no, it's not. Like, it's a very well-known town along the Costa Brava, and I don't want to give you the false impression that this is going to be, a completely forgotten about slow little town, because it's not. It's full of people. It's very lively. You've been there, you know that it's a very busy town in the summer. And I think marketing it as anything other than that just contributes to problems of like over tourism, for example.
I agree completely. I think this hidden gem culture or, off the beaten track tourism, like it really seems harmless. And like I'm not meaning to sort of say that like people are do it's not their fault. It's not influencers' fault. Like these are the words that we've been taught to use. This is what we're told to say. But there is
Mm,
a massive difference between a hidden gem and a busy, lively town on the coast of Spain that is like very popular. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a busy town on the coast of Spain, but it is busy. And if you give people the wrong impression, like if you say to them, this is a hidden gem, or no one goes here, no one knows about this, which is the latest, one that seems to be popping up, no one knows about this. They will turn up and
yeah.
find that actually quite a lot of people know about this and they're not alone. And that might also impact their behavior.
And I think also like just the fact that when we say these things on social media, the way that we say them is often like, I discovered this,
Yeah.
little known, like nobody, lesser known town. I find that personally, I find it's like almost hinging on like a colonizer mindset because like
Same.
most of these places are very well known by the local people. Like you're not discovering it. Like, for example, people from Barcelona have been vacationing in many of these spots for decades. Like you are not discovering this town, it's
Yeah.
been very well known and very well loved by many, many years by people that are, domestic tourists or even coming from like neighboring countries like France. For example, a lot of French people know many of these places because they come to vacation there. Portuguese people, Italians, like Spain is very well known by, these kind of like close countries as well. And I think like that I find that happens a lot with international, like foreigners that come to visit that say these things. And it always just kind of makes me cringe a little bit because I think to myself, like, it's almost like you're colonizing this place that has been discovered and loved for many, many years by locals.
Yeah, it's definitely like colonizing language, whether it's definitely accidental, but it is like unfortunately like that kind of language. I mean, it's funny because when we went to Tossa del Mar, I said to you, I've never heard of this place before. I was so excited to go to somewhere that
Yeah.
I'd never heard of. And I said to someone who I was talking to on Instagram, yeah, that I hadn't heard of it. And she said, really, it comes up every other reel for me. Like she's like every time I'm scrolling, like
Yeah.
I see and this is the thing, like it may not be on your radar and our radar, but that doesn't mean it's not already well known.
Yeah. And I think people navigate a lot from like an almost like an egotistical frame point, which, makes sense because at the end of the day, we're all kind of in our own
Yeah.
heads and we're living our own experiences. So this isn't like to necessarily shame that because I understand why it happens, but that does tend to happen that when we don't hear about a place or we've never heard about a place, then it's almost like we tend to assume, oh, then nobody else has, right? Or if I'm just discovering it now, then everybody else is also discovering it along with me because, I'm navigating from my like self-centered kind of viewpoint, right? Um, and I think that happens a lot on social media.
Yeah, I definitely think that happens an awful lot on social media. I mean, like you said, it's completely natural. Like we all think about what we know, what we see. And a lot of people who share hidden gems and off the beaten track places, quote unquote, is not them being deliberately like trying to colonize. And like no one's saying that, but it is unfortunately the impact that it has. Like people
Yeah,
watch these things and because they live in a them-centric bubble. So if, for example,
exactly.
I'm watching a story of Angie's, Angie lives in Spain, and she's saying this like hidden gem on the coast, meaning a place I'd never heard of before. And I look at it, of course,
Mhm.
I've never heard of it because I don't live in Spain. And I'm watching thinking, wow, hidden gem. And in my mind, I'm thinking that place is going to be completely empty. And then I go and
Yeah,
it's not. And this can do a lot of things, right? Like this can mean that I, the tourist, am frustrated. I get there, there's a lot of
yeah,
people. It's not the day I wanted. Maybe I'm rude when I get there. Maybe I'm rude to service staff because I'm frustrated. I'm, walking around, it's hot, there's a lot of people.
yeah,
Maybe I come back and I share negative things about it and say, I didn't like this place. It wasn't what so and so told me it was going to be like. It was crowded, it was blah, blah. Maybe I do worse and I share about it and say it's a hidden gem because I still want the clout of having posted it online. There's a lot of things that can,
yeah. I think that actually happens a lot, unfortunately. I think that problem is too, and this is something I wanted to say before. I think that we can fall into like blaming individual actions very quickly. And I think that individual actions are very important in this case because, like, the whole point of this conversation is talking about kind of the responsibility that we carry as creators into the social media sphere. But I think it's not without saying that a lot of these problems also come from the fact that these algorithms and these apps reward the use of these terms.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, right? If people's reach was not incremented by using SEO terms like hidden gems or whatever other, catchphrases that are trending and that are going to get you lots of views, if the algorithms didn't, in a way, reward that, then people maybe wouldn't do it,
Yeah.
And it's like kind of like a chicken and egg scenario because obviously the algorithms reward certain things, but the algorithms also function based off of our behaviors. So if we're,
Right.
interacting with certain content and engaging with it and sharing it and saving it and essentially disseminating it further, the algorithm picks up that, okay, this is something that I want to, also reward because it's having an impact and it's moving quicker. And ultimately the algorithms are, machine learning. So what they're doing is they're just, picking up on what works. And what works is based on our behavior, right? So it is kind of like a chicken egg situation. But I did want to kind of like also say that I do think that the apps themselves also kind of play a role here, right?
Yeah.
Because there is a certain responsibility. I think that maybe the founders of these apps also should start having these kinds of conversations because maybe there need to be some checkpoints being put into place to kind of try to help not have these negative impacts of certain social media behaviors on the world.
It's true because it almost rewards behavior that is problematic in other ways. So, for example, like deliberately being rude about a place, going and saying, I hated this place. It was awful. Because you're going to get
Exactly.
comments from people who are saying, no, that's not true. Like, I loved it. Or, people maybe from there who are offended. And if the app is purely rewarding engagement and like that kind of content that's going to go viral, like that's, yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. They do share a responsibility.
Yeah. So I did want to say that as well, even though, like I said, I think the focus of the conversation is on our individual actions and what we can do because that's all we can control currently. But, there is also bigger conversation that I think needs to start happening at a higher level as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, do you think that there are things as individuals that people can be mindful of when they're sharing their content that maybe would have a positive or less negative impact? We mentioned
Yeah.
one already, which is giving more information, but yeah.
Yeah, I think there are many things that can be said here. I'm definitely not going to give you a comprehensive list because there's so many ways that we as creators can be more conscious and better at what we're posting. I think, first of all, we need to be mindful of the language that we're using when we're presenting things. We need to be mindful of how we're talking about destinations, whether we're being authentic in how we are marketing them to our audiences and whatever other public sees it. So, like, the language that we use and the content that we share is very important. Then there's like the whole aspect of the actual content itself, because then we can go into a whole discussion about, how people alter their content to sell a reality that doesn't exist, right? So a lot of people, for example, will take a beautiful picture in a place and then edit out all the people so it looks like there's nobody there. And then, of course, if they share and they say this is a hidden gem, then you're going to go, wow, look at this place where nobody goes, right? Meanwhile, the reality is completely different. And we see that a lot, for example, with a lot of content from like places like Bali, right? Where it
Mm.
seems like there's these people in the middle of nowhere with absolutely nothing, and it's gorgeous and it's stunning. And what you don't see is the line of 100 people behind them all waiting for the same shot, right? And so I think there is a responsibility to be clear about the reality of what we're sharing and the reality of these destinations. And I think that also comes from the content that we share. So if you are altering your content, which I personally don't think you should be doing, period. I understand that some people do it for artistic purposes. So if you're doing it for that, you need to be putting disclaimers that your content is altered, and these disclaimers need to be visible. Like, you don't want to put them at the very bottom of your caption where, let's be honest, 5% of your audience is going to get to. These should be treated just like, when you put word ad in your, sponsored content. This needs to go at the top and it needs to be clearly visible and preferably without people having to scroll down ages into whatever else you have written in your caption. So
Mhm.
I think that's also another thing. I think that also we need to just try to be more conscious. We need to be learning. We need to be, actively trying to inform ourselves. That is a responsibility that we hold as travelers, not just as creators, that we need to try to be navigating the places that we go to in a way that is the as as little harmful as possible. And then also, if you do something and you mess up and you do something wrong, which is okay because we're travelers, we make mistakes, and sometimes things are not clearly marked. Sometimes we don't know, right? It happens. We're not here to shame mistakes. But what matters is how you take accountability for those mistakes. And the best way to take accountability for mistakes on social media is to take down the post.
Yeah.
Like, I really don't like it when people leave a reel with, let's say, for example, they had an unethical animal experience. They didn't know that this experience was unethical. Okay. They do it, they post a reel about it, somebody calls them out about it, multiple people call them out about it. They realize, oh, X experience was unethical. What do? Put a disclaimer in the caption and leave the reel up. That actually is harmful because most people are not going to read that disclaimer, and therefore they're going to see that unethical action and want to do that themselves because people naturally want to be close to animals and want to have these experiences. Like, many of us want that experience, and therefore we see it and we go, okay, perfect, I want that too. And we don't go and read into the caption, right? So the best thing you can do is, when you've been approached by a mistake, is take down the harmful content. It doesn't matter. Like, you need to have certain morals as a creator, in my opinion. And like, I know it's going to sting and it's going to hurt, especially if that piece of content is going viral, but the right thing to do, the responsible thing to do, is to take that piece of content down.
I think that a great thing that you can do is pull a comment from that reel and make another reel that will probably go viral as well because you're sharing the same footage with similar
Yeah.
captions, with similar words, and saying, "Hey, I got it wrong the first time." People love that. People love being
Yeah.
like, "Oh, she got it wrong." Like,
Yeah.
they're not taking like making fun of you, but they like to see it for like, "What did you do?" And what you said about the animal experiences is it's really true. And I think one thing that people don't understand or realize, or whatever you want to call it, is that people scroll through your profile. Like, if people come to look for you, not look for you,
Exactly.
sorry, if they see a piece of your content and they want to follow you and they go to your profile, like I do this personally, I will scroll through a good few posts and be like, do I want to follow this person? And there's people, I can't be the only person doing that. So people will still see that content, even if it's not like still gaining views. I also get views
Exactly.
on Reels from months ago now, um,
Yeah,
because the search bar exists, like people can still
exactly.
content.
Exactly. And I think people many times will just see the thumbnail, right? So that also, goes back to the fact that a disclaimer often isn't enough, like, because people will see the thumbnail, or people will see a quick 3 seconds if it shows up on their For You page or on their Explore page or whatever. Um, and they're not necessarily going to read into it and go, oh, that was, not actually a good thing to do.
Yeah.
So I think that that's, on one hand, it's like what we put out into the social media sphere. We need to be more responsible about what we're putting out there. And I think that as creators, we hold a responsibility and we need to start being more conscious about it. And I think a lot of the times I think it's a I think we're in a bad place when we start to value metrics over morality,
Yeah.
Like, when it starts to be more valuable to you, how many likes, views, comments, saves, shares, abstract metrics, if you really think about it, when those things start to become more important to you than real world impact, that's almost like when you need to take a step back and really, really think about what you're doing as a content creator and really as a person in this world, navigating as a traveler or whatever other content you're putting out there, right? And I think we're not doing that enough. And I think as a creator community, we also need to hold each other accountable. Sometimes it's difficult. And I speak from experience. I've messaged creators before about, things that they've done that maybe they didn't realize were harmful, unethical, whatever you want to call it. To mixed reactions, but I never regret having had those conversations. Um, Oftentimes it's made me look at these creators differently when, for example, they chose to ignore what I said, or they blocked me, or they took other actions towards my feedback that maybe were not in the direction of accountability and you removing the content that was harmful. And I think that it's almost like a way for me to assess somebody's online character. And I think that we as a community need to be really mindful of which content we are supporting and engaging with, because that's another thing too, right? One thing is the content that you are creating and you are putting out into the world, which you need to be, more responsible for. But another thing entirely is the content that you're engaging with, because your engagement is currency, social currency, and it's what drives the algorithms of these apps. And if you're engaging with somebody's content who you know is doing harmful or unethical things, but they're your friend and you want to support them, you're actually contributing to that harmful behavior being essentially disseminated further. So
You
I
are.
think that's kind of like the second important aspect, is being more mindful of who we're engaging with, who we're following, kind of content that we're sharing, saving, and kind of pushing out. Even just like liking, commenting, viewing also counts. Like, what you engage with really matters. And I think we need to also start being more conscious about what we're engaging with as creators, and which content and who we're following, and kind of like where we're spreading our social currency.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to recap there, but like basically I think what we said is like so being more mindful about what you're sharing. And then you also
Yeah.
mentioned kind of who you're supporting, like when you're posting, being sure that you're giving plenty of information. I wanted to add there as well, I think a lot of people do remove people from their photos and videos for privacy reasons. And I think again this is fine, but just say that you did it, is
Yeah.
useful. And again, like, I also want to stress that, like, this conversation that we're having, like, what you said and what I'm adding to it and what I think, like, we don't necessarily, like, make the rules for the world, but it's just kind of like an idea that a world where we are being more mindful, where we're not valuing the likes on our content over the shares, it would genuinely be a nicer world, right? Like, it's not a case of like telling people you can't do this, you can't do that, because I think these conversations can sometimes sound like that. It's more about
Yeah.
thinking like genuinely when we travel, like we want to make the world a better place. That's what everybody wants. Like nobody wants to go and like just consume the world to death. So these things that we put out there as content creators, these things that we consume, like they are ways that we can help and have a positive impact, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree. And um I think that we need to remember that these are discussions.
Yeah.
They're not coming from a place of judgment or from a place of like pressuring people to change, or from like a scolding kind of outlook. I don't think that's the intention that either one of us has here. I think what this is a discussion. And I think, like I said before many times in this conversation, I think as a creator community, as creators, we need to be having these kinds of discussions. And sometimes these discussions can be uncomfortable because you might feel like you're being personally targeted. Um, because, so we often find ourselves kind of reflected in the things that are being said, right? But we need to be having these discussions as they may be. And right now it's you and me, but hopefully, after listening to your podcast, maybe this will incite some other people to also have these discussions with their own creator friends, and kind of like spread that thought outwards, because nobody else is going to hold us accountable if it isn't us as a community. I think the public has already been trying to kind of
Mm.
get their opinion in. I know the public has been holding certain creator actions accountable for sure, but we also need to be having this discussion within our community, and not just having, the public or people that maybe are not using their platforms as creators being the ones to call us out. Like, we also need to internally be having these conversations amongst each other and saying, hey, you know, clearly something is upsetting people. Why is this happening? And what can we do to, be better on these platforms?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on the note of positivity, have you ever seen a reel or piece of content go viral and have a positive impact, do you think? Or is it always,
Yeah,
yeah?
no,
Can
no. I think that there are pieces of content that can have a very positive impact. For example, there was like a little shop here in Barcelona that was going to close. It was an old family business, like a local family-owned business that was like 140 or 150 years old. Unfortunately, as you've probably heard, times are kind of tough for a lot of locals here in Barcelona, and they've been getting tougher and tougher over the years with rising rent prices. A lot of locals are being priced out of their cities. And what's happening is a lot of these small family owned businesses are starting to really struggle to be able to pay the rent, especially if they're in locations that are kind of prime locations within Barcelona. And also, COVID affected a lot of these businesses, right? A lot of businesses shut down during COVID. And around the time towards like the end of COVID is when this small, like local family business was on the verge of like essentially going bankrupt.
Mm.
Um, and some local like Catalan influencers actually started to do like a series about this small family-owned business that was on TikTok. And they started sharing a lot about it and basically being like, we need to save this business. Like it's X amount of years old. This is the owner. Like they would have interviews with the owner, which were really, really sweet because he was an older gentleman. So it was really cute. They were having like these conversations with him about, all the years that he had spent and his family had spent kind of like keeping that business alive within the neighborhoods. And they actually ended up saving the business. So he didn't end up having to close down. People started to go there, people started to shop there. And he didn't end up having to close, which I think is amazing. And that all came about because a few local influencers decided, hey, this local business is struggling. We have platforms. Let's do something about it. So yeah, I do think content can have a very positive influence.
That's amazing.
We
That's a
just need to use it right, you know?
Yeah, exactly. That's a really nice story and like a really good way to support. Like, if you, I mean, yeah, they were local to the area, but like
Yeah.
they could have been anyone kind of doing that, you know? So
Yeah.
that's nice. Um, do you think when it comes to this kind of thing that we also need to bear in mind like sustainable travel? And if so, like what do you consider to be sustainable travel?
Yeah, I think sustainable travel is really important, especially, I mean, I'm coming from like a Barcelona standpoint, right? So this is obviously the city that I live in, and I've kind of seen and I really understand the struggles that local people are having currently with like the current tourism model of the city. And I think incorporating sustainability into travel content, especially in the current climate of things, is super important because it's what you always say, right? Like sustainability is not just about, green initiatives and environmentally friendly things. It's also about the impact on locals. It's about, the impact on people as well as places, right? And I think that in Barcelona, when we travel sustainably, we need to be thinking about the impact that we're having, not just on the places we travel to, but also on the local people. And that can go, from not reproducing these harmful trends that clearly disrupt local life to being, a more thoughtful and better tourist to trying to inform ourselves about the issues that locals are facing and in some cases, if it's possible, right? Because I understand that not everybody has the possibility to be able to travel outside of high season, but perhaps, if Barcelona is a destination that you've really wanted to visit for years, but you feel kind of like torn between should I come here if this place is really struggling right now with over tourism, maybe if you have that option, you can come in a less touristy time of the year, even though I mean tourism here is kind of like a year-round thing. But maybe instead of coming, during the hot peak summer months, coming like in November or in March, where obviously there will be less tourists than there are now, might be one way for you to travel more sustainably. And then obviously not staying, for example, in Airbnbs, which are really harmful to locals here in Barcelona. It's an issue that I think people can inform themselves on before coming. When you're here, also being thoughtful about where you're putting your money, like shopping local, trying to go to like these local bakeries or local restaurants, buying souvenirs from local artisans, not like some random souvenir shop with things that were not made here by local people. Like really being mindful about like where your money goes, right? And all of that, right, I think falls under the umbrella of sustainable travel.
Mm.
So to me, like sustainable travel is much, much more than just like, you know, reducing our carbon footprint and being a more environmentally friendly traveler, right?
Yeah, the more that I get into this, the more I ask this question, the more I do this podcast. Like, I have started to think that, like, sustainable travel, and you kind of hinted at it there, is like sustainable travel is researching every destination individually and seeing, because,
Yeah,
like, for Barcelona, for example, there are plenty of places in the world where I'd be like, okay, if you need to use Airbnb, like, it's not really a big deal. You can go.
yeah,
So, like, they're probably locally owned. Like, I stayed in Airbnbs in Malawi, they were all like, owned by locals is a great way for them to be able to put their flat on like some
yeah,
kind of online platform. But in Barcelona, like Airbnb is a huge problem. Like it's
yes,
probably one of the biggest problems in the city, and that is something that
yeah,
you really shouldn't, but you really like if you do that, you're really not helping. Um,
exactly.
Yeah, so I think like when you're talking about individual destinations and different places, like it is good to kind of figure out what makes me a sustainable tourist there versus somewhere else.
Yeah. And having that individualized approach to each destination, I think, is kind of the key here, right? Because traveling sustainably here is going to look very different than traveling sustainably in Malawi, for example,
Yeah.
right? Like they're two different places that require two very different approaches. And I think that part of that responsibility of traveling sustainably lies on us being able to research these destinations and learn about the issues that locals are facing so that when we arrive there, we're better informed and we can navigate these spaces without, encroaching or causing harm or disrupting people's lives,
Yeah.
essentially.
Because it's also not just about locals. Like I know that you've spoken to me quite a lot about, for example, influencer behavior or app behavior, if you want to call it, in the Galapagos and how
Yeah.
and
I
how
knew we were going to get there.
Of course. But no, I think that's also very important to think about as well. Like it's not just local lives that we're kind of having an influence on. Like if you're an influencer or content creator and you go to the Galapagos and you get a selfie with a sea lion that was like literally 2 feet away from you or even closer, yeah, okay, maybe on that instance it was the sea lion that came close to you. Did you put that like loud and clear in your picture? Did you say like I tried to get away from it, I tried to back off? Like, no, okay, so probably the next person who goes, who looks at your picture, is going to try and get the same picture. And that might mean that
Yeah.
they go close to the sea lions. I mean, you know all this. I'm not preaching to you. You're more passionate about it than I am.
I'm just sitting here like I really struggle, and I say this like with the most measured tone I can. I really, really struggle when I see 95% of Galapagos content on the internet because almost every single piece of content that I have seen content creators putting up of the Galapagos online, there is some rule that's being broken. And it's very frustrating, I think, because I've been to the Galapagos. My husband is Ecuadorian, so I have like a certain love for his country and for the islands themselves that maybe other people come at it from a different perspective. But it really frustrates me because when you arrive in the national park, because Galapagos is a national park, when you arrive there, you are given rules. Like there are very clear rules for you as a tourist in the Galapagos Islands about how to navigate um, being there as a tourist and how to navigate wildlife encounters. And it's very clear about that. And it really bothers me because you essentially have to read these rules. It's not like you can enter the islands and say, "Oh, I didn't know." No, it's part of like the entrance into the islands is you being familiar with these rules. And it really bothers me when I see people then posting pictures or posting reels because in I'm not even joking when I say in almost every single piece of content I've seen, people are way too close to the wildlife. They're going into places where I know because I've been there that you're not supposed to be walking around on because there's like delicate, algae or moss or lichen. Like there's certain places on the islands that you're not supposed to walk on. And people will post themselves walking on top of it or going to these places that I know they're not supposed to be trespassing on because it's very clearly marked to not do so. Or just getting way too close to baby wildlife because, the Galapagos, when you're there, what's really special about the islands is I think it's the only place in the world that you can arrive at and really feel like you as a human are kind of the outsider,
Yeah.
like you really do feel like the animals own the island and you're just kind of like essentially visiting their land, which is a really powerful considering I think it's the only for me it's the only place I've ever been where I felt that way.
Mm.
And it's just really frustrating to see then that people are kind of going into this place and then treating it in the way that they do and then posting this irresponsible content online when they know that they're breaking the rules because in the case of the Galapagos you cannot say that you didn't know that these were the rules. And then people see that and they go, "Oh, I want to go there too so I can also have, sea lions swimming right up to my face." And it does happen that these wild animals, because they're curious, that they will approach you. But this comes back to responsible sharing. If an animal approaches you, obviously you should be trying to, move away from it. Don't then take that interaction and post that online and then justify your actions by saying, oh no, well, the sea lion swam up to me. Yes, but you're still posting a picture where you're breaking a rule, which is being too close to an animal, and which other people are then going to try to reproduce because maybe that animal swim up to you, but the next tourist will swim up to the sea lion, you know? So I think with Galapagos content, I get particularly frustrated because I think it's one of the places where I've seen the most amount of irresponsible sharing on the internet.
Yeah, and it's so problematic because like I've even heard people saying that they don't know if there's a way that they can visit the Galapagos responsibly because they're like, I just feel I would mess it up. And that's really a shame when you consider that it is a national park. It is somewhere that should be protected, should be paid for. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think we've got a long way to go with that one. But Angie, do you have anything else that you want to kind of add before we wrap this up? Like anything else about sharing, about content creation, like social media apps, anything at all?
I think what I would kind of just like close with is that I think that the sort of important conclusion of like today's discussion is just we all need to be thinking more about what we're posting on the internet and then how that content is being kind of received by our audience. And then also how we're interacting with other people in the online space. Like, I think if people are going to take anything from today's conversation, it's just to reflect a little bit more about what you're putting out into the social media world and also how you're interacting with content in the social media space. And I think that if we all kind of like walk into these, social media apps with that reflective, self-reflective attitude of, am I putting something out there that is harmful? Am I putting something out there that is potentially not sustainable? I think we all started kind of like almost questioning our own actions, whether through posting or liking or sharing other people's content as well, I think we would all be one step closer to having better influencer behavior. And I think that we also need to hold each other accountable. And I think I also wanted to say that it's okay to have these conversations. And I hope that in a way we can like encourage other people to not be afraid to talk to other creators, to, maybe I don't like canceling people. I think that that can be toxic very quickly. But if you see somebody and you know that what they're doing is wrong, maybe open that conversation with them, hold that, shared space. And if they don't react to that conversation in a positive way, maybe that's not somebody who you should be following and whose content you should be essentially supporting, right? Like having all these kinds of self-reflective attitudes, I think will make for a better social media space for all of us. And I think we all have kind of a bad reputation right now. I think influencers and content creators, like the general public, you have very mixed opinions, and there are some very negative attitudes towards creators and influencers. And honestly, some of them are for very good reasons, which I completely understand. And I think that we all need to become more self-reflective and we need to have more of these discussions and we need to call each other out and we need to kind of like try to create a better social media future because right now I think we've still got quite a bit to go to be better online.
Yeah, unfortunately, 100%. One thing I would say as well is just remember that you have influence. Like, just remember that what you post doesn't go into the void. Like, those 10 people watching are 10 people watching. They're real people.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah. I
go
wanted
on.
to say one more thing
Yeah.
because I think it's like kind of the important I said it once and I just want to kind of like end with it too. I think that it's really important to remember and to always keep in the back of your mind not to value metrics over morals,
Yeah.
I think we all need to remember at the end of the day that these are social media apps and these things are essentially abstract and we need to remember that real world impact should always matter more than like online clout. And I think that's kind of like what I kind of want to end with.
Nice. I like that. So, Angie, what are you working on at the moment and where can people find you?
So you can find me at Where's Angie. I mainly post on Instagram and TikTok, same handle on both platforms. So at Where's Angie with two E's. And I'm also on Threads if you want to follow for more random related discussions. But yeah, that's mostly where you could find me. And I'm always happy to make new friends.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, this has been the Sustainable Travel Podcast. You can find us on Instagram at the Sustainable Travel Podcast or on my website, which is thattravel.co.uk. If you are listening on YouTube and Spotify, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you so much.